Hello, thank you for joining us. Welcome to this podcast where we're going to be looking at global legal expansion. In particular, we're going to be focusing on 2025, what we saw in terms of legal expansion globally in 2025. And then we're also going to try and get our crystal balls out and gaze ahead to 2026 and see if we can predict or anticipate any themes that we might see in the legal sector across the globe. I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by two really fantastic speakers and experts in this area. The first is Robert Bata, who, maybe Robert, I'll ask you to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you very much, Corinne, and it's delightful to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this distinguished panel. I'm Robert Bata. I am the founder and principal of Warwick Place Legal. Our focus is on international expansion. We are strategic advisors to law firms seeking to expand internationally or to consider approaches to entering foreign markets in whatever way makes the most sense for them.
Fantastic. That, as you can hear, a really great expert to have on our podcast today. And my really excellent partner, Zulon Begum. Zulon.
Hi, Corinne. Hi, Rob. Hi, great to be here too. So I, alongside you, Corinne, we do a lot of work around advising law firms and other professional services on everything from, constitutions, governance, as well as a lot of kind of international structuring work, mergers, opening offices in other jurisdictions. So we have a wealth of experience we can talk to.
Fantastic. Thanks, Zulon. Great to have you both here. And in terms of myself, I'm Corinne Staves. I'm a partner here at CM Murray. So let's get cracking. Let's get straight into it. I think what will be a really great place to start is to look back on 2025. We're recording this right at the beginning of January 2026, which is why we all look like we're sitting in the dark because it's such a great January. But I wonder, Rob, whether you could just kick us off by thinking a little bit about what we saw in terms of legal expansion and what worked and what didn't work in your view.
So thank you very much, Corinne. I think that it's a great question in the sense of trying to encompass a very dynamic year. Many different things have happened. So in terms of what's been interesting in the rest of the world, you've seen a lot of expansion into the Middle East. And part of that is that it has been seen, wholly aside from the conflict zones, it's been seen as an area of potential great growth. So you've seen a lot of firms expanding into Saudi Arabia, even into Abu Dhabi and so forth. What you've also seen, and that's been very interesting to me, is a very disputes-focused type of expansion program where you have disputes boutiques, but also some of the larger firms engaging in expansion that are essentially disputes focused. And I would, for example, single out the Herbert Smith Kramer Levin merger, which I consider essentially a disputes play. I'm not sure how the transactional side will work out, but so that's been interesting. I've seen.
We ought to interject there, Rob. We advise Kramer. We're allowed to mention that we advise Kramer, so I can confidently predict that was the most successful merger, and there is nothing in any way to comment in any other way.
Excellent. It's a wonderful merger, and they are in fact two wonderful firms whose great strengths, from my perspective, are in fact in disputes and disputes adjacent areas. It doesn't mean that they won't be able to succeed in other ways, and I think it's important for them to be in the U.S. So I will probably blow my horn about another major merger at some point, but we're not there yet. I think that some of the areas that have been quite interesting have been Latin America. In fact, I would say that one of the most successful expansions has been into Latin America. And I think we're seeing independent firms, especially some of the European national champions, kind of scratching their heads about how to compete with some of these great transatlantic mergers. And I think we'll see more of that in the coming year.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rob. And I know, Zulon, some of the regions that Rob's mentioned there are regions where we've acted for clients and we've seen clients exploring either with publicly or sort of exploring transactions with potential partners. In terms of the work that we've been involved in and that you've been advising on, what sort of issues have been coming out of those discussions? What's been sort of driving those collaborations and those combinations, and what have been the stumbling blocks? Because for the ones that do hit the headlines, there are a number that haven't and will never see light of day because it just didn't happen. It was a successful fail, for example.
Yeah, I think maybe if I can frame my answer as being where do I see firms kind of succeed and how they've done
Mm.
that? I think firstly, where I find firms being successful, whether it's in opening another office in another jurisdiction or a merger, is where they have a very clear strategy around that, why they're doing it, what is the purpose, and ideally, if they are looking to merge, who's their ideal merger partner, or what is their ideal jurisdiction to open in, what kind of people do they want to recruit into that office, or the kind of clients they want to service in that office. So having a very clear direction and having partner buy-in behind that, so that management feel empowered to go ahead and negotiate or kind of go ahead and open the office and recruit the people that are needed, etc. Because often it's very time consuming and expensive strategic move that they're doing. So not having your partners behind you, it becomes very difficult when you come to the crux of it. I guess it's kind of good business hygiene, making sure that for example, if you are looking to merge, that you are truly kind of merger ready, so that you are already thinking about and addressing some of the problem issues that your merger partner will no doubt uncovering any due diligence issues. So whether that's underperformance among your partners, whether it's difficult partner behaviors, whether that's expensive pension liabilities, lease liabilities are often some of the key stumbling blocks that we often see crop up in the 11th hour. So if you can address those way ahead, then you're putting yourself in a really good position. The other things I would also kind of recommend firms do if they're thinking about these kind of things is ensuring that thinking about the regulatory aspect way in advance and factoring that into your timeline. So whether it's merger or a regulatory merger or an office expansion, there's usually will be you can't get away from the tax issues and the regulatory issues, I'm afraid. So thinking about those way in advance puts you in really good stead. So that's where I've seen whether it's a merger or an office opening somewhere else, that's where firms have been well prepared ahead of time, makes the process much more smoother.
Fantastic. Thanks, Zulon. That all makes a great deal of sense. And I guess, Rob, a huge part of ensuring that a merger or combination, kind of globally particularly, is ensuring that sort of really fundamental issues like culture and remuneration are resolved. And I guess, given your experience in global expansion matters, do you have a sense of what kind of real sort of cultural due diligence looks like when people are considering sort of a combination or a merger?
Sure. That's a very good question because people talk about culture all the time. And every firm has something on its website about the culture. I never see a website that says our culture is lousy, but we pay a lot of money, so come and join us. Or we don't care about culture or any of the. It's always we have the best culture in the world. So to me, culture really has to do with not these are great people. Oh, we like them. We enjoyed having dinner with them. Culture, I think, has two really important aspects when it comes to mergers. One is the prospect of integration. In other words, can you work with those people? Do they have the sort of history that says that they collaborate with each other? Can you expect them to collaborate now with you as a merger partner and with your partner? That's one. And the other is remuneration. Not how much you make, but how do you set remuneration? If the principles of setting remuneration are fairly similar, that's an important cultural bridge. And those are the two things I look at.
And I guess the other question I would ask on that is, how do firms misread that cultural compatibility? Because often when you see people looking back on mergers after 5, 10 years, when people have got a really good sense of whether it's been a success or not, people say, oh, I'm not sure we were the right fit. And in that sort of sense, that seems to go back to culture. Do you have any sense of where firms get that wrong?
I think it's absolutely in the integration side. It's
Yeah.
You don't have to be just like the other firm. What you have to do, and I don't want to single out any particular mergers, some that have been around for some time, although actually they're variants, not mergers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, um, but where you can see that in fact there really hasn't been the level of integration and I'm not talking about financial integration. I'm talking about the ability to work with each other, to recognize each other's strengths, and to be comfortable in referring work to each other.
Mm.
And that's where things go wrong on reflection. And that's when people say, well, gee, they just weren't the right people.
That's interesting.
But
Yeah.
it's beyond that.
Yeah, of course. And I guess that all goes to the heart of it's got to be 2 + 2 = 5, doesn't it? And if you haven't done that part, then of course it's not going to work out. And Zulon, I think that Rob touched on a really interesting point there about the kind of the remuneration. And we talk very often in a partner remuneration context about the fact it's not an absolute number question. It's about a relative consideration and perceptions of fairness. It's much more complex than just a single number on a piece of paper. Do you have a sense from your advice on structure and documenting these transactions of the remuneration issues that crop up and possibly even derail what could be otherwise quite positive combinations?
Yeah, I think two main points I'd make is, and the second will be aligned to what Rob has just said, but the first one will be kind of an undue fixation on the headline PEP number. And we see stories all the time about, the differentials between, say, US law firm PEP and UK law firm PEP. There's a reason for that. So, there are different market dynamics. There's currency issues involved. There are tax issues involved. So looking at it purely from the headline PEP perspective is not really helpful. And you also have to think kind of strategically in the long term. There may be, it's going back to the point about 2 + 2 = 5. You'd hope that in a merged firm, even though there may be differential PEP at the time, but over time they'll kind of level out because of the 2 + 2 + 2 = 5 point, in that hopefully the brand of the merged platform will command higher rates over time in the various jurisdictions in the merged firm. So looking past the PEP number is important. The second is as Rob mentioned, around remuneration and culture, having a good strategy and plan as to how you align remuneration going forward. It's not going to happen overnight, especially if there's a big difference between the type of remuneration model between the two firms. In my experience, a purely what you kill firm is hardly like to merge with a pure lockstep firm. It just probably culturally it won't work. But you often see firms who are kind of hybrid models that will, they'll still have differences, but those differences can often be bridged. So having a strategy around how you bridge that over time, and having a transitional plan so that partners feel protected in the short term, at least, so they don't feel like they're going to move over to a completely different compensation system without insecurity as to what their pay might be for the next couple of years. So having some transitional protections for partners is quite important, because otherwise it can be quite difficult to get partners on board with what remuneration will be the number one thing that will be on partners' mind when they're voting for or against a merger.
That's a really good point. Thank you very much. And I guess Rob made a really good point earlier around what the structure of the combination is. We're sort of talking here about quite integrated combinations here, but obviously there are sort of ways of combining and starting to work together that fall short of sort of full kind of one firm, fully integrated profit sharing style merger. For example, variety structures where you might have sort of separate profit pools, and that might be another way of either resolving some of those seemingly unsolvable problems around remuneration, because global variations, national variations, you could find some offices are considerably less profitable than others, and one way could be just to accept that, and perhaps either temporarily or on a longer term basis saying, well, actually this will be our structure and this is how we'll manage things. And I think it would be interesting to pause there to think about different forms of combination. We still obviously have a high incidence of sort of alliances, networks, and those sorts of organizations. Organizations is probably the wrong phrase, but sort of not quite combinations, but sort of relationships, if you can call them that. I don't know, Rob, do you think that alliances in today's sort of way of operating are still an effective way to serve clients internationally?
I think they're effective for certain parts of the world. I think that if you are a significant commercial law firm,
yep.
with which immediately implies that you have significant international work, and you only work through alliances, you have to pick those very, very carefully, and the fewer allies, the better. And again, in some places, for example, I think DAC Beechcroft, I think Clyde's, others go into certain jurisdictions purely by way of alliances, and it works for them because they specialize in particular areas like insurance or shipping or whatever. Um, you can see that now that Denton's has now warmed to Dacheng again after having split up with them for the best of reasons, which is nervousness about data security and so forth. They've now cobbled together some kind of alliance in Hong Kong that may work well for them. On the whole, the idea of being able to work globally through best friends, that's really, I think, very difficult to achieve. You look at a firm, a very, very fine firm like Simmons and Simmons, has been looking for best friends in America for who knows how long, and they may think they have 10, they may think they have 30 best friends, but the point is, it's not going to get you there, at least in my view. Um, Networks are a whole other thing. I'm not a big believer in them. I think that essentially they're what some people call dialing clubs. You need a title search in Lithuania. You call your network buddy and find out, and then you forget about them. The important thing to remember about these things is that you're serving clients, and savvy general counsels will be very interested in how well your network works in terms of the ability to control the output and the quality that you get and so forth. There are very, very few networks, I believe, that are all that great. Obviously, Lex Mundi has been around for a long time. I don't know how well it works. To me, it's not really all that different from Denton's, frankly, except the remuneration model is different. Um, and then but to have more a fairly successful network, I guess you have to be very, very involved, have a lot of sessions where you share information, you have committee work, and so on and so forth. And that's rare. I'd say probably Geneva Group International is probably the best at that.
Well, that's really interesting. I guess then the way we can summarize that is it's like personal alliances, which it's complicated, right?
Yeah, it is, and you can never really control your partners in terms of sticking with the particular alliance because they'll have a friend in the Netherlands and they don't want to use your network partner in the Netherlands or
Yeah,
whatever it may be. So
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And Zulon, Rob has rightly highlighted kind of quality of output and reliance on standards as a really important consideration when firms are considering alliances or other sort of loose connections like that and combinations like that. I wonder if you have any other insights in terms of other things that firms ought to be considering when either considering new alliances in, say, in new jurisdictions as expansion grows, or indeed just to continue to review the existing alliances to work out whether they are delivering on the firm's strategic objectives.
Yeah, I guess quality control is a big issue, I think, in these, and the perception of brand parity, I guess. So if you're a tier one firm in one jurisdiction, you want to have comfort that you have people in your network that match your brand in terms of quality, and that sometimes can be quite difficult to police. So having clear policies around quality control is important, and how you police that can be quite tricky, I think, in alliances, because often they're quite informal. The other thing is about exclusivity or non-exclusivity. It's rare to get exclusive alliances at the moment, but if you do have exclusivity, how do you police that? And having clear governance around how you do that, and what are the sanctions if exclusivity is breached, or are there exceptions as to when a firm can refer to a different firm than one that's in their alliance? So having kind of clear parameters around that is quite important, and also things like important things like maintain confidentiality within how you do that, and cyber security risks and things like that. Managing conflicts, having clear policies around that is quite important. But it's much more difficult to police all of these things when you're not in a kind of one structure, I think, where you have a disparate number of firms in different jurisdictions who are effectively independent, coming together under a kind of loose umbrella.
And I think because we're seeing so much activity across the legal sector, I mean, I have a very UK focused perspective, and we're seeing a very active market in terms of changes of ownership and mergers, and particularly external investment PE is very active. Well, there's a lot of talk around PE in the UK market and in certain sections of our sector. We're seeing that. I guess I would also encourage people in alliances to think about what the rules are about that. If your owners change or you take external investment or you become part of a large group, is it still okay to be part of the network or the alliance, or does that trigger some kind of termination event? And the other thing I would think on that is there a direction of travel? Some firms will sort of test the water with an alliance or sort of a loose connection with a view to closer collaboration. And I think the feel there and the momentum needed would be very different from, for example, a long-standing best friends arrangement that's never going to be more than friends, for example.
And I think those kind of testing the water into kind of more closer integration is usually through those Varine style firms rather than the Lex Mundi type networks. And people think of Varines often as, the Denton style, but actually there are Varines out there that are fairly integrated and not the much more looser Denton's type model. So that you can shape a Varine model according to your internal commercial objectives, really. So you can have much greater integration internally in the Varine model as well as kind of an alliance model. So
yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and that's absolutely right. But at the end of the day, I also think that the Varine does have a stopped kind of a terminus where going beyond those levels of integration that you've outlined quite correctly is impossible. Then you have to rethink, or you will have had to have in your strategy some sort of ultimate solution for going beyond the Varine. But that's a hard one.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And I wonder, Zulon, whether you think that actually there's a role still for sort of independent, purely national firms within jurisdictions, or whether sort of all the influences we've been talking about and the trend towards global expansion and combinations mean that actually that they are a dying breed.
I think there are still some really great national independent firms out there. The ones who are successful are the ones who manage to kind of put together a good international network to ensure that they have a flow of cross-referral work coming in from their international network. So it does kind of depend on that referral network they have in place. But I can see going forward with the greater emphasis on internationalization and consolidation globally that it is going to be much more difficult for the independent firms to compete as their competitors are able to offer effectively one-stop shops to global clients who may have legal needs in various jurisdictions. But I don't know what you think. Are we still going to see the independent firms still here in 10 years' time?
Yes, yeah, I definitely think so. I think that you'll have independent firms along various tiers of practice level or quality, but I definitely think that, as you suggest, there's been a bit of a wake-up call among the large European independents in the wake of A&O Sherman and others to say, well, what is happening to our markets and how do we compete in these? And so some of that can be addressed by some very selective alliances and even best friends approaches. Those can work. And some of those are really a question of what do these independent firms do on their own in terms of expanding. So my alliance partner, and I also have an alliance, just Kerma Partners, and they focus on Latin America. And my alliance partner, Leopoldo Hernandez, and I spent some time in Madrid at the beginning of last year speaking with the heads of every major Spanish firm. And what you had, the discussion essentially was, we're national champions, but there's nothing else for us to do in Spain, so we're going to look at other markets. Or we're a national champion firm, and for us, Spain is really the place to be, and we're just going to keep growing and growing in Spain. So there are two different approaches, and I think you're seeing that among the Italian firms. You're seeing it among the very few that are left in Germany and others. I also think that there are some regional independents that will remain so. For example, the Central European Independent Regional Kinsteller, which used to be part of the Linklaters network, um, and there are a number of others. I think that there is room for independent practices, and there will continue to be room for them, but the competition will become harder and harder.
And this is fantastic because it's segued beautifully into what I was hoping to touch on next, which is trying to forecast and look forwards a little bit in terms of what you might expect to see in 2026 and probably a bit beyond 2026 in terms of some predictions. Obviously, you've mentioned the state of the kind of national practice sort of market, but are there any other sort of internationalization or expansion trends that you might expect to see in 2026?
Well, there's a lot. First of all, I'm going to see, I think, a little bit more expansion into the Gulf states. I think that can continue to happen. And again, all of this is subject to various geopolitical events, which we hope don't turn into anything terrible. There are trade wars and tariff wars and this, that, and the other. But having said that, I think that the Gulf area will remain interesting for people. I think Latin America is really kind of on the radar in many different ways. I think that there's going to continue to be a lot of internal consolidation within the UK and within the US. We've seen a lot of that, not so much foreign expansion, but firms getting to that kind of critical mass within the States, for example, where they will start thinking about what to do internationally, and the target being Asia and probably Latin America more than Europe. I think that we're going to see more departures from Asia, from certainly from China, uh, and not that much in Singapore, which has been somewhat over-lawyered at this point. But Hong Kong will continue to be interesting, and Southeast Asia will continue to be interesting. And beyond that, just on a technical level, and I think we may or may not have a disagreement here, but I think we are heading toward um, the exhaustion of some of the Varine structures. Um, that's one. And two, I believe that some of the major former um, Anglo-American combinations um, will see one side or another wanting to extricate itself from it. Um, and there are quite a few out there. And I think there's good reason to believe that there will be an effort to do that,
Mm,
and I think that could be very interesting for the market because that then also might suggest that there's an actual merger in mind by
mm.
the extricating partner. That would be something different.
That's really interesting. And before we go to Zulon to find out whether she agrees or disagrees, as you predicted, I'd be interested to know what you mean by the exhaustion of Orion structures. What does that look like?
Um, I would say that what it looks like is a greater focus on the total financial integration as much as
Mm,
possible.
I see. Yeah.
A tiny example, and pardon me if you worked on this, I think it's a great thing, but the Winston Taylor deal,
Hmm.
Winston Straw and Taylor Winters, Taylor Wessing rather, sorry, um, where in fact that merger essentially disentangles much of the Varine and becomes an actual merger between Taylor Wessing and Winston and Strawn, but much of the Varine part of it gets separated out. And I think that wanting greater financial integration is what's driving that, and I think that's going to happen more and more.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Zulon, I'd be really interested to know whether you, as Rob predicted, you do disagree, and also whether you have any perspectives on what sort of either regulatory or governance or legal trends that might drive and shape how international expansion happens over 2026 and beyond.
Yeah, so it's quite the bombshell, Rob, you lobbed in there about, Anglo-American firms demerging. So you must know something that we don't. I would probably say that we're probably going to see more Anglo-American law firm mergers, and probably, as you say, firms are aiming for more integrated models rather than the variety. But I would say that there is a problem, even where there might be a desire for integrated mergers. There is a huge tax issue that often crops up in these types of mergers, and that can often be quite a big sunk cost for law firms, which often partners don't have the appetite for. In order, in terms of kind of absorbing that tax cost in having a fully integrated merger, so that becomes quite a significant block to firms in affecting that on day one. So that's why sometimes we do see firms going for the kind of the next best option is through a variety model where they're not integrated on day one, but may integrate gradually over time to avoid the day one tax cost of that. So that's one kind of perspective that I give on that. But I do think that there's certainly among the UK firms that there's a kind of appetite for internationalization and a recognition that it's hard to kind of expand into the biggest legal market in the world, the US, without some sort of merger, because the UK firms have struggled to kind of do that on their own in the US compared to the US firms coming into London and virtually kind of taking it over. So it has been quite asymmetrical. So I think mergers might be the way forward for some of those UK firms looking to expand into the US.
You're absolutely right that it's very difficult and can be quite costly to go immediately to full integration. And that's just not really on the cards in most situations. So I think it's really more a question of phasing it. But I also, having, as Corinne said, dropped the bomb, I do want to emphasize and agree with you, Zulon, that there will continue to be a good deal of expansion activity and merger activity between US and UK. I think there will be an interesting focus on and by some of the non-London firms, some of the perhaps Northern or Midland firms, for various reasons, including their access to industrial England and so on and so forth. So I wouldn't want to minimize the fact that the merger activity will go on, and it will affect many different parts of the world, but clearly the ones between the UK and the US are going to be the most significant.
I think that's really interesting. Thank you both. I think just to wrap things up, I'd like to come to each of you for a kind of a quick fire perspective. When we were discussing this advance, as Zulon described them as wins and warnings, and I really like that. So I don't know, Rob, whether you want to kick us off with a win or a warning, sort of on the topic of sort of global expansion for 2026.
Well, I would say there have been a lot of good wins, but right now, I mean, certainly, I think the Ashurst-Perkins-Coie merger is a fantastic one. Not because I was a strategic advisor on it, but because it really makes a great deal of sense. You're still subject to a vote, but everybody's very optimistic about that. But that's going to be a great win. I think going back a little bit, one of the big wins is Perez Llorca going into Mexico, which was really the year before, but they've now replicated in Colombia too. I think that's a tremendous move for them. I think a warning, KWM, King and Wood Mallisons, that seemed like an interesting combination when it happened. A slow motion train wreck began to happen when they acquired S.J. Berwin without having done proper due diligence. Then they managed to get themselves out of Europe. Now they've divorced. These are strong firms on their own, King and Wood on the one hand, and Mallisons on the other. But there is a warning there about trying to do too much too fast without both sufficient financial investigation, financial due diligence, and cultural due diligence. And even though that goes back a ways, we're still seeing the effects today.
And Zulon. Any wins or warnings for us?
I think on the wins, I think I probably agree with Rob on those. There's some interesting mergers having been announced. It will be interesting to see once they kind of go ahead, how they pan out. And we won't see that for a few years yet. I think going back to the A&O Sherman merger, we've seen some fallout from that in terms of kind of partners leaving and things like that. But that's kind of often expected and in large law firm mergers like that. So we would expect that in any kind of merger of scale. In terms of kind of warnings, I would say that there, in terms of kind of regulatory issues for firms who are subject to UK SRA regulation, that there is greater scrutiny on firms, and overseas offices will be subject to the same if they're subject to SRA regulation around client monies held in overseas offices as well. So just ensuring that if you are opening offices or you have offices overseas, that you have strong regulatory governance in place and oversight, and not treating those kind of offices as just kind of satellites that you can forget about is kind of my warning, I think, for firms who have or are thinking of expanding overseas.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much. That's really fascinating insights there and some great predictions. Thank you to everybody who listened in to our discussion today. Great to have you with us. Obviously, you are free to go back to our podcast library and see whether our predictions for 2025 and before that 2024 were correct. And I guess I should just finish by saying thank you to our guest, Robert, and to you, Zulon, too. And we look forward to seeing you for our 2027 predictions next year. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.